1933. On March 4th, Franklin Delano Roosevelt arrived at the Capitol to take the oath of office and become the 32nd President of the United States. Unable to walk independently after a 13-year battle with polio, Roosevelt wore leg braces under his pants, but was still able to take the few short but sturdy steps to the podium.
It had been raining for the week before the inauguration in Washington, D.C., and as he's coming to take the oath of office, the sun literally did come out.
Before a crowd of 100,000 at the Capitol and tens of millions on the radio, FDR recited the 35-word oath by heart and then gave one of the most memorable speeches ever delivered by a president.
After years of economic spiral and something close to despair, when millions of Americans had basically abandoned hope about the future, this man came out of nowhere, and in the course of a speech, one speech, began to address the psychological needs of the country.
So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
A critical aspect of any president is to engender confidence. It was critical that the American people could hear him say, hey, there are folks here in Washington who are going to take charge.
FDR was following through on his mandate from the 1932 election, promising a new deal for the American people. He had carried 42 states and 57% of the popular vote. In Congress, Republicans lost over 100 seats to the Democrats, the biggest congressional shift in nearly 40 years, giving Roosevelt a solid majority to work with in both the House and the Senate. But he was vague on how he was going to use it.
Franklin Roosevelt came into office with a great deal of hope. No one knew precisely what Roosevelt would do.
Roosevelt believed in action for the sake of action. Even if it's wrong, it's okay. The humorist Will Rogers said, you know, if he'd burned down the Capitol or the White House, we would have said, good, at least he got a fire started anyhow. That's how cold and bad it felt in 1932.
The first thing he did was declare a bank holiday, basically to shut down the banks all over the country. There was serious question whether this was constitutional, and Americans were alarmed enough that they were willing to go along with it. Then the next thing he did was to figure out a way of preserving the banking system more or less as it existed.
10,000 banks had failed since 1929. With a Congress solidly behind him, Roosevelt pushed through the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which reorganized the banking system and, most importantly, federally guaranteed deposits for the first time.
The next morning, when the banks started to open, lines again began to form outside the banks. But now people lined up to put their money in banks. And within the space of 2 weeks, the banking crisis was resolved.
Roosevelt also realized he needed something that would provide comfort to Americans. So he signed a bill re-legalizing certain alcohol sales, saying, I think this would be a good time for a beer. On April 7th, thousands lined up outside taverns and distilleries to enjoy their first legal drink in 14 years.
Roosevelt had that cheer as a leader, and that was important to the voter, especially in the Depression.
The first 100 days is probably the most storied period of presidential success in Congress in all of American history. In fact, he got his brain trust together, and they hastily wrote legislation, and he sent it to Congress, boom, 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 and they passed it, major piece of legislation after major piece of legislation.
The Agricultural Adjustment Act, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Civil Works Administration, the Public Works Administration, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Roosevelt displayed a passion and a commitment to finding solutions for every aspect of the Depression.
Roosevelt revealed the same qualities in dealing with the Depression that he had once used in trying to deal with polio. A sense of determination, an unbounded optimism, a willingness to experiment with different ideas. And this really becomes the hallmark of his style of government.
But above all, what he did was he established, as Andrew Jackson had, 100 years earlier, as Lincoln had at the time of Fort Sumter. Great leaders don't manage a crisis. They frankly use the crisis to establish an emotional bond with the American people.
Roosevelt was deeply concerned that he be seen as a pillar of strength for the country, so he carefully crafted his image for the public eye.
Anybody who met him was shocked when they saw him in a wheelchair because there were only 2 pictures that show him in the wheelchair that he used every day, and neither of those were printed while he was alive.
FDR soon realized his real power lay in being heard, not seen. While Harding in 1922 was the first president to be heard on the radio, and Coolidge a year later the first to make regular radio speeches, Roosevelt mastered the medium through radio addresses every week, his fireside chats.
My friends, you and I agree that security is our greatest need, the chance to work, the opportunity of making a reasonable profit in our business.
There's this immediate magnetism, and the White House is just flooded with letters. Suddenly they have to hire dozens of people to handle this immense volume of mail that comes in. There's something about the radio that makes people feel more connected and want to reach out and respond.
FDR's approach was an enormous success. Though the country was still in a depression, still struggling with double-digit unemployment, the American people were confident in their president. In the 1936 election, they gave Roosevelt the biggest landslide victory in presidential history, 46 of 48 states. FDR's confidence swelled.